So last year, I had an absolute disaster happen. I was working for a client at a project in Paddington, a project that I didn't even want, and out of nowhere, the client went bust. Now, it was crazy for me because if you go back to 2023, this was a project that at the time I didn't really want. I wasn't desperate for the job. I overpriced it, and because I was up against someone else who either didn't want the job or was very expensive, I ended up being the cheapest quote and I actually won the job. Now, it's absolutely crazy because how we won the job was we won it off the back of a project that we had in Fulham, which we did very well on, we performed extremely well, and that main contractor told us that they had another job for us. So the next job that was going to come in was a project in Slough, but last minute, the Slough project never actually happened. But what they did say is, look, Joe, we can't give you this job. However, we can give you another one in Paddington. So we stepped into the job in Paddington, did really well there, made our money. And it was off the back of that this opportunity came for the building next door. Now, at the time we were busy. We had a lot of work on. We had so much happening within the business. And it wasn't a job that I was desperate for. I could see there was a lot of headache. The access to the back was a nightmare. You had to come through a back road, and the walk really was probably the best part of about 100 metres, to get material to the working station. And there was a lot of material that would need to go into this, There was a lot of material that had to go from the roadside through the path, which again was about a 100-metre walk, and into the back where the boys would actually be able to start fixing and taking up the scaffold. So the scope for the works was a scaffold on the front, a scaffold on the back, and a temporary roof. Now, this was over a hotel in Paddington. The hotel has now been shut for about 3 or 4 years, and they've had a lot of problems on the job. But going back to the time where we were asked to price the project, I overpriced it massively. I charged probably triple the rates of what I would normally. I had some of it charged at £200 a metre, which typically you're not winning work at that rate, like really in London, especially in central London, I would say you're anything between 80s to 120, dependent on what you're doing. Sometimes that can be less, sometimes it could be more. And it depends who you're working for. But this one here was someone we'd never worked for before. We were very busy at the time. I didn't need the job. So I put it in at top money. And because, again, I was up against someone else who either didn't want the job as well or was just very expensive, we ended up winning the project. Now, in the end, because I priced it at such good money, I was excited about the job. I was very excited. And I thought, yes, this is going to be a brilliant earner for us. And to an extent, I wasn't wrong. There was a lot of money in this project, and the more we got into it, the more that it just became apparent that there was so much to do. But what was crazy is the main contractor, what they should have done, okay, is they should have started doing a soft strip on the building. And obviously the hotel has about 10 floors, okay? The first thing they did, they asked us on day one to get the scaffold in and to make the building watertight. The first thing they did was strip the roof. They stripped the roof off the hotel, which I'm going to come to this, and it's actually what saved me. But the fact they did that was odd. They got a scaffold in place and never actually worked on it for about a year and a half. So we had a year's worth of hire on the scaffold. So we won the project. I've priced it for 52 weeks for the front, the back and the roof. They've rushed us in there, told us we need to get it watertight as quickly as possible. So we've got the front up, got the back up, got the roof on, monoflexed all around it. So made it a completely encapsulated structure. And they stripped the roof off. But what was weird is they were a contractor who had big trading history. They'd been going for like 20 odd years. Their turnover was about 40 million. And as a business on paper, they looked very, very good. They looked like, a serious company, a company that were respected and a company that for us were good to be in with, you know. And at the time they had other nice projects on, and yeah, they looked like they were doing well. And listen, early on as well, they were good payers, you know, they were really good payers. Like, we'd put a bill in and 30 days later, the money would be in the bank, you know, and these were quite decent large sums, you know, because you had the front going up. That was, I think, 40 grand, you know, the back was maybe 60, you know, and then you had the roof as well, which was probably another 50 grand, you know, so there was good money in this, and we got it up quickly, you know, so we had almost half that money straight away, you know, and they paid the money, they were good payers, but we could start to see they started to get in a mess. And I think they obviously took the roof off the building, they gutted absolutely everything, they took out all the internal walls, they were taking floors out, so they basically created a shell. But the problem was the whole building, and again is another thing that saved us, is the building wasn't structurally sound. So our scaffold really was the only thing in the end that was holding this building up. But we started to get wind, and I started to get an inkling that something wasn't right, you know, and I'll be going in there all the time asking, you know, like, are you guys making money here? Like, you know, is this a profitable job? Because I could tell that they had men there all the time, and once the building was gutted, nothing was happening. It was almost like they'd backed themselves into a corner where they've done too much work, overexposed themselves, and now they don't know what to do. It's almost like they'd backed themselves into a corner, and it just, something for me didn't sit right. I knew that there was problems, and I've always got a good gut feeling, you know. I think I'd say it to anyone, is like, you've always got to trust your gut, and sometimes that's all you've got in business, you know. You have to go with a gut feel, things feel right, and we've got that anyway. It's kind of nature of the beast, that we've got that in us, you know. Like, you can sense things, you can sense energies, and we're a lot smarter than we think. We've got that sixth sense, and you can read situations, you know, and you've got to really have that to your advantage. Sorry, my spotlight had gone off. But yeah, I think as people, you've got to, that's one thing you have to do, is you always got to trust your sixth sense. Sometimes it's all you've got, you know, and certainly for me, I was going in there, I could see that things weren't right, and yeah, there just wasn't things that were adding up on the project, you know, and I could start to see that these guys were getting in trouble. Payments then started getting a bit slower, probably now about 18 months into the job, okay, and the job's in additional hire. So they're paying now for a scaffold that they've not even used, and they're paying a weekly rental on it. That for me, certainly in scaffolding, you know, and listen, it's like, I think in construction, there's all different wins that we've got, you know, like in demolition, the wins that they have is what they take out of the building, what they reclaim, you know, what they can sell on. In scaffolding, essentially, it's variations and hire. That's the money maker, you know, or the ones that can save you bacon if you've underpriced something. The job went into additional hire, and like I say, I could see that something wasn't right. Yeah, something wasn't right. The bills started getting paid later, and it was obvious that there was problems, that the main contractor had issues. There then started being a lot of change of hands of surveyors in and out, you know, different people that were meant to come in, sort out people getting paid, and they were in and out very quickly. You know, I had multiple conversations with people trying to do a deal with me on the hire. And like for me, my standard rate, industry standard, is 5% per week additional hire. So if you ask me to price a job, I'm going to come to you and I'll say, how long do you want the scaffold for? Within that price, it'll be a fixed price for the full scaffold for that amount of time, with weekly inspections on top. If it overruns that, there'll be an additional charge, a weekly charge for the rental. On top of that, there'll be an inspection cost, which is charged at a weekly rate. Now, the inspections are a legal requirement, but for the client. So once we've handed the scaffold over, it is a legal requirement for the main contractor, or whoever is now liable for the scaffold. Once we've handed it over to them and they paid us, it is their legal responsibility to have it inspected every 7 days. So they've now come to us and they're trying to get me to do a deal on the inspections, on the hire. They're trying to see what they can do to save money. Bear in mind, at this time, they've already started to mess around with the money. Okay, so I'll always do a deal with people, but sometimes you see when there's a problem, okay, and sometimes you've got to stick to your guns, because they started to mess around with money. And I said, look, cool, I'm happy to do a deal, but we need to look at the long-term plan here, because you're messing me around, I'm doing variations, you're trying to say that things aren't signed off properly, And everything that we did, luckily we had a backlog of everything. And especially now, I mean, we are way more concrete now because of this. It's like, again, massive learning curve, massive learning curve. You know, someone doing you for a lot of money, you learn, you know, it makes you sit up straight and you start to think, wow, I don't want that to happen ever again. You know, it's like a kid that gets bullied in school and all of a sudden he comes out fighting, because you don't want that to happen again. You start to learn how to defend yourself, how to make sure that no matter what, these things aren't going to happen again. And it's the same thing. You know, I got nearly taken out, and now I've got everything within my business to make sure that we are fully prepared for this type of situation if it's going to arise again. You know, first and foremost, I've got boys that depend on me. I've got a family at home. I've got my girlfriend. You know, I'm helping my mum at times. You know, I've got people that really depend on me. Yeah, so I need to make sure that my situation is solid. You know, my foundations are strong. And listen, I'll always entertain a conversation, always. And like I say, when there's a deal to be done, I'll always do a deal with a client. But I could start to really see that I had to stick to my guns here. And they started to pay late. And they had all different people that were coming in, and all different QSs and surveyors and people in and out the door. Then you've got new project managers coming in, and it's like things are getting messy. It's almost like people came into the position for the new company and saw that there was just an absolute sea of disruption and thought, wow, like this isn't good, you know? And they're out the door, which obviously for me it's ringing alarm bells. But I was privy to this months before. Like I was always going in there, you know, or like I said earlier, I'm always asking, is there any problems here? So I was privy to it. I was aware of what was happening. Shortcut to what really is probably the biggest moment and toughest lesson that I've ever learned. I agreed. I said, look, okay, instead of doing fixed prices, I will give you the boys on day works. There was a load of internal work to do. I said, look, we'll agree a day work rate for the boys. I won't charge you for materials. You know, this is me given to the project. I said, carry on paying the hire. I said, that will cover any material we put in. Like, there's a deal there to be done, and you can have the boys for as long as you need, and we'll get everything done. Cool. Shook hands on that, okay? So the boys have been working flat out. I had about 5 men there for a month constantly, okay? Which costs money, you know, really, that your charge with your overheads on that is probably about £300 a man, you know, in terms of business cost, yeah, per day. So by the time you've got 5 men there, you know, you're looking at £1,500 a day, £7.5 a week, it's 30 grand a month, you know, and that's just the cost. So we've then run up a bill of say 45 grand or whatever it was with the hire, inspections and everything else. And this is the first bill, and we got to the end of that month, and they never paid. And bear in mind, they'd started to be a bit slow, but we were getting paid at this point. Like we were getting paid, and they basically said, "Look, Joe, we can't pay this at the minute. We're waiting on money in ourselves," which they've never said before. That again was more alarm bells. They've said, "Look, we can't pay this at the minute, but if you carry on moving, we're going to get money from other jobs. We need this one to keep moving, and we'll get you paid. Like, we'll get you paid within a couple of weeks." I said, okay, fine, no problem. So stupidly, I kept the boys there, and they managed to keep me there for a second month. Okay. So by this time, the money's pretty much doubled. Yeah. So we're now owed the best part of about 90 grand. And obviously there's been a lot of conversations between me and them, and I'm starting to get wind as a serious problem. Yeah, we're now 2 months out. At the time, it helped me, you know, like it would have worked well to keep the boys there. There wasn't loads on anyway. So it was something where they kind of had me a little bit, because there wasn't loads of other bits going on anyway. You know, it kind of worked in my favour to keep the boys there. You know, we had a decent little deal with the day works. Yes, I wasn't getting money directly from the material, but I was charging additional hire on the rest of the project. So it worked out, the numbers made sense. So by this point, we've got to about 90 grand in, and still no money paid. And by this time, I've then had to pull the boys off site. We've said, look, we're not going back to site. And within, I'd say, a 2-3 week period, I've been in and out of there a couple of times. The hire's carried on building up. And we've now got to the end almost of the 3rd month. And the bill is now all in about 110 grand. Now, I'm obviously getting twitchy. Like, this is now a lot of money, and 110 grand for us, really, at that time then, it was about 60%, I would say, of our monthly turnover. You know, we were hitting about 180s a month in turnover, and we're running at a good margin. But you probably had about 2 months there worth of profit that we needed. We're a growing business. Elsewhere, we're buying material. Elsewhere, we're paying wages. Elsewhere, we're paying for fuel. Elsewhere, we've got rent to pay. You know, elsewhere, there's a whole world within the business that has to carry on. So, but we're in deep trouble now. We're like, I need this money. You know, I've kept a third of the firm there at the time for a fair amount of time. You know, I've got a lot of material tied up, and it's money that I'd accounted for, you know. So I'm now in a sticky situation, and in the end, we sent the boys there because I said, look, well, we're going to have to start clearing stuff. And bear in mind, at this point, I'm now being ignored by the financial director. The accounts lady is saying there's money coming. She was good as gold, but she's saying there's money coming. Like, we're fine. We're just, you know, money's just a bit tight at the minute. And bear in mind, like I say, their accounts from the year before were spot on. You know, they profited a few million. Turnover was 40 mil a year. You know, like a decent. Obviously, main contractors, their margin's low anyway, but they were making money from, you know, not very long ago. Now, the boys were there, and one of my foremen at the time, Jake, rings me and says, Joe, look, I don't want to worry you, but people are here and they're clearing the building because they've not been paid. Now, that to me, that's not good. The site's derelict. There's other trades now in there and they've not been paid either. It's not just me. I then get on the phone to other trades that are in there, and there's a lot of people owed a lot of money. My 110 grand was by far the smallest bill of anyone I spoke to. There's people in there that were owed 550s, like more money, like a lot of money, a lot more than 110 grand. I think 550 was the biggest that I can recall, but there was a lot closer to that than there was down my end, yeah? But it's all relative, you know? That to me was a lump of money. So I'm obviously worried, and I'm thinking, oh, this is just an absolute nightmare. And basically, long story short, I end up going there myself, and I look to speak to the new team who are supposedly about to take over, a new surveying team who are going to be project management, surveying, and everything else. And they didn't really know a lot. They said, look, we don't know what's happening. We're waiting to hear from the office. We don't know if we're starting. We don't know what's happening. I've then driven back. Bear in mind, I can feel this in my stomach now as I'm relaying all the story. Like, it was a big moment for me. And basically, I've started to drive back home. I get a call from someone at the previous main contractor. And they said, look, you didn't hear this from me, but we've just gone pop. We've just gone bust. And my heart sank. Like, my heart absolutely sank. Like, I couldn't believe it, you know. This was 110 grand, that money that I needed, and money that if it had come in, you know, it would have had me in a half decent position as well. You know, we were doing well elsewhere. The company was still moving elsewhere, you know. But I needed this money. Without it, I was in a deficit, you know. I was in the minus for a minute. Now, the money from that main contractor never came. I never actually got the money directly from them. They went. And listen, it's things ongoing now. But reality is, if I'm lucky, I'll probably get £2 a month for the next however many years, and that'll be it. And listen, that will never happen. That money from them is gone. But my saving grace was where we were told to put a roof on from the beginning, which we did. What saved me massively is the fact that the only thing keeping the building watertight was our scaffold. It was the only thing that was keeping the building watertight. So I got straight on to the owner of the building, to the hotel owner, and I said to him, look, if we don't do a deal on this now, I'm going to take that roof off that building. I will leave the rest of the scaffold up, and that building will be exposed. Now, by this point, I've heard that the main contractor, who have obviously gone bankrupt, who are now gone, ceased, no longer trading. They owed, I think, about £11 million to all types of different people. They owed a lot of money. And a lot of them were never going to get that money. You know, like a lot of them would have to go through the process and everything else. What saved me was my scaffold had that building watertight. And that saved me massively. Without that, what can you do? You know, what could I have done if we were a demolition company, you know, and the building has been demolished and then the client's gone bust? What are you going to do? You're going to rebuild it. Like, what are you going to do? You can't do anything, you know? So my saving grace was I said to him, look, I will expose that roof. I'll leave all the other scaffold off and the hotel will be absolutely shot to bits. He very, very quickly paid Bull. Now, obviously, I've just lost 110 grand. So my back's to the wall, and in business, and something that I am massive on, is no one's coming to save you. You know, you've got to save yourself. Yeah, people aren't going to give you an easy ride. People aren't going to, you know, come and bail you out when you need it. It's you versus you, 9 times out of 10, you know, and it's you versus everyone else, you know. So it's a case of you and your team. Yes, you do business with handshakes and with honesty and, you know, you do things the right way. But when push comes to shove, you're on your own. When he asked me what money we need for the scaffold, I asked for 10 grand a week because I did not know how long that was going to be up for. And I was 110 grand out of pocket. And even at 10 grand a week, that's 11 weeks that I've got to wait to get my money back, you know. I needed the money back quickly. Now, in the end, he said, look, I can't do that. And we came to an agreement. Now, once that agreement was made, they started paying instantly. I said, look, you need to pay this every 2 weeks, but I need the money in advance. I need 2 weeks worth of money now, and I need the money every 2 weeks for the foreseeable. They started paying that in November last year. The scaffold is still in place and probably will be for another year. Now, I've definitely had every penny back now, and the project has now had major variations there. There's an awful lot going on. You know, I've definitely come out on top of this situation. But at the time, I had so many people saying to me, Joe, you need to take the scaffold down. You know, like, get out of there, get gone. I was saying no. I had control of that building. My scaffold gave me control, total control. As soon as that scaffold was down, I had nothing. The damage would have been done. And there's so much to be said. A lot of times in business, it's a case of whose balls are bigger, you know. It's a case of saying, I will really do this. And if they believe you'll really do it, and listen, 9 times out of 10, you don't want to do that. Listen, I don't want to cause anyone any more trouble. And 9 times out of 10, if I do expose that roof, the damage is done. I'm not going to get paid. So it's all about playing smart and playing carefully. But I played it very well. And that's the one thing I would say to any scaffolder in particular is when you've got a situation like this, don't be rash. You know, you've always got control there, especially with scaffolding. Whatever they need, do the opposite. If they need it down, leave it up. If they need it up, start to take it down. If you're keeping the building watertight, tell them you're going to expose it. You know, and the good thing for me at the time, this was November last year. The weather was horrendous. You know, couldn't have been a better time of year for it. So yeah, crazy, crazy story. So I got done for 110 grand, and through other means, I managed to get back every single penny.